NFL Week 8 is in the books. We are on to Week 9 here at RotoWire. Nick Whalen, Jeff Erickson here with you, giving our weekly sneaky ads, Jeff. So not the obvious names on the waiver wire, of which there are not many this week. We'll be upfront about that. If you're looking for sneaky ads, guys who are less than 25% rostered, it's pretty bleak out there, especially at running back. But we'll go position by position. We'll give you quarterbacks, we'll give you running backs, we'll give you receivers, and we'll give you tight ends. If you're in a deeper league, if you're just looking to build some depth, kind of veer away from some of the obvious candidates, we'll give you some names at each position. Jeff, good to have you back this week. As always, I'll let you lead us off, and let's start with quarterbacks.
Yeah, let's do that. Quarterback, I think you have to see Cleveland. There's new life with Jameis Winston in there. Over 300 yards against the Ravens. I think the opponent had something to do with that. Game flow had something to do with that, but we'll take it. They draw the Chargers this week. That's a game that's going to probably be ground into the muck. That's part of the problem. That's how Harbaugh likes it. So it's not going to be wide open, but I think he's a reasonable ad. And there's a possibility in Indianapolis that Joe Flacco is going to start another Anthony Richardson. Shane Steichen today said, we're looking into everything without committing one way or another. That's a road game at Minnesota on Sunday night. I'm not sure that's great, but it's at least an option if you're in a super flex league at least.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Flacco. I thought that was somewhat of a telling quote from Steichen. It's coach speak in some ways, but it also is not a firm, affirmation of belief in Anthony Richardson, right? I think all you have to say is Anthony Richardson's our quarterback and you move on. You could always go back on that. It's not binding. And I think the fact that he did not say that is an indication that the Colts realize what we all do as fantasy players, which is that this offense has been significantly better with Joe Flacco. And I think there's some correlation there as far as some of the receivers who I'd be more comfortable adding if it is indeed Flacco for the Colts. They have an opportunity, I think, to keep their way in that AFC wildcard picture. And I feel a lot better about them doing that right now with Joe Flacco than I do Anthony Richardson. I do want to highlight a couple more guys. Matthew Stafford's only 18% rostered in ESPN leagues. It is certainly not a coincidence that the only 2 weeks this season in which he's really been a viable fantasy starter have come with at least one of Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp in the lineup. You're looking at Seattle, Miami, New England, Philly, and New Orleans as the next 5 games on the schedule for the Rams. You got some pretty bad passing defenses in there, some pretty good matchups for Matthew Stafford. And it feels like the Rams kind of want to hit the gas now, right? This time last week, it sounds like they might trade Cooper Kupp. They might be pulling the plug. All of a sudden, you go beat Minnesota, and it feels like this season and this passing game is back on track. And then I'm double checking on Sam Darnold as well. He's the furthest thing from a sneaky ad, but he's still pretty widely available in ESPN leagues. The roster rate really fell off after the Vikings bye week, so he might be out there. He's basically giving you 18 to 22 fantasy points most weeks. Really good schedule coming up as well for the Vikings. They go with their tour of the AFC South, Indy, Jacksonville, and Tennessee, their next 3 opponents. Any other quarterbacks you want to talk about, Jeff, or should we move on to running backs?
Let's move on to the paltry running back position here. And it is very paltry this week, folks. We apologize for that. But when you don't find an obvious pickup option, start looking at opponents. Try to figure out game flow. And I'm going to throw you off because I'm going to go recommend Jamaal Williams this week, who's micro owned. But they face Carolina. And I know New Orleans isn't just running up a score on anybody or running up any scores on anybody, but they're going to get Derek Carr back this week, most likely. Chris Olave is back. I think they're going to be a more efficient, regular offense this week. Alvin Kamara is playing through 2 injuries right now, a rib injury and a hand injury. I think this might be a case there where New Orleans gets a lead on Carolina, and Williams, who scored against Carolina in week 1, gets another chance this week. It's a desperation play. So you have to be pretty desperate there. Your best options might be on your bench, but if you're really looking for a pickup at running back, I think he could be someone that could help you get through the storm.
Yeah, and Kendre Miller tweaked his hamstring this past week as well. So that's one less obstacle now in front of Jamaal Williams, who is only 2 years removed from, I believe, leading the NFL in total touchdown runs. So if there's ever a chance to roll out someone like Jamaal Williams, it would certainly be against the Carolina Panthers. And I'm still monitoring Kendre Miller, really only in deep leagues at this point, but we'll see how serious that injury is. If it's a multi-week injury, if it's a retweak of that hamstring that caused him to miss time early in the year, then that might be curtains for him. But if he is able to overcome that, I think there's a chance that they could want to get a look at him. This is a Saints team that's lost 6 in a row. I think they know where their season is heading at this point. You're right, Jeff. It is very bleak out there. I don't feel good about either of these recommendations. Roschon Johnson, he's got 4 touchdowns in the last 3 games. He only played 17 snaps this past week, but if you're just looking for a touchdown vulture and what's turning into, I think, an offense that you don't necessarily trust against the good teams, but can beat up on the bad teams, Arizona, New England, and Green Bay are the next 3 opponents for Chicago. So you get kind of a mix there, but should be some advantageous scripts for that offense. And then Jaleel McClaughlin, somebody that I've added and dropped in 4 leagues already this year. Javonte Williams is still clearly the guy in Denver. We know that, but McLaughlin is very clearly now the number 2, still used a lot in passing situations. Now, we haven't seen that a whole lot the last couple of weeks because Denver's been beaten up on bottom feeders, but the Broncos schedule is stiffening up. Baltimore, Kansas City, Atlanta over the next 3 weeks, likely to be playing from behind in at least some of those games, if not all 3. So ultimately not a ton of upside here, but if we're scraping the bottom of the barrel, we got bye weeks heating up these next couple of weeks. I think Jaleel McClaughlin, could be a Hail Mary play out running back in PPR.
Yeah, I like it. I think he's got better body control around the end zone. We saw it on a touchdown reception this past week. The Bucs game earlier where he juked a guy on the 4th down carry for a touchdown, whereas Williams keeps on he just kind of plows ahead. Yeah. And I've rostered Williams in a lot of places, and I'm just done. So I'm not done, but I'm very frustrated because he didn't perform well in a smash matchup against Carolina. So I see that. Denver can see what we can see, that McLaughlin is better on a per carry basis. It's pretty ugly at running back. Let's move on to wide receiver here because it's still pretty ugly, but at least there's some options. Cedric Tillman still happens to be less than 20% rostered in most leagues, most formats. I know that happens to be the case on Yahoo. 2 touchdowns this week. The week before, 12 targets. We mentioned Winston earlier. Well, it carries over to the pass catchers here. Tillman's been unlocked. Elijah Moore has been unlocked. Njoku's already rostered everywhere. Jerry Jeudy's mostly rostered everywhere. So I'm going to point out Tillman, who just really is all of a sudden like, oh yeah, this guy can play after all. He's not a 3rd round bust. He's actually a player.
Yeah, who knew that having a real quarterback like Jameis Winston would be able to unlock this entire passing game. Tillman's the obvious one for me. I mean, if he's still out there in your league, after this past week, make sure you grab him because everybody's going to be lining up bids for him. If you want to go even sneakier, Jeff, the sneaky of sneaky ads, Elijah Moore, he's a clear number 3 in terms of snaps and routes behind Tillman and behind Jerry Jeudy, but he was still targeted a team high 12 times by Jameis Winston in that Baltimore game. Obviously, the Browns offense is going to be significantly more pass friendly going forward than it really was at any point under Deshaun Watson. Upcoming schedule is a little tough. However, they do have their bye in week 10. So keep that in mind, as you make these transactions. Like the Chargers are not a plus team to go against really for anything fantasy wise, just because they bleed so much clock. They have a decent defense, but if you need help at receiver, certainly go Tillman first. But in a deeper league, I don't mind taking a look at Elijah Moore. Who else you got at receiver?
Desperation plays here both. John Metchie, but they play on Thursday night at the Jets. It's not a great matchup, but if Stephon Diggs and his non-contact injury keep him out, and he was out today in estimated practice on Monday, they have to have someone to throw to. Collins is still out, and if Diggs is out, someone's got to get targets beyond Tank Dell.
Yeah, I have Xavier Hutchinson on my list as well. I would be surprised if Stephon Diggs is out there on a short week. And, with Hutchinson, it's been disappointing in terms of the production, but he's still playing a ton of snaps. He's still running a lot of routes. He's doing a lot more in that offense than Robert Woods or John Metchie are in terms of just being on the field. But the targets per route numbers are pretty ugly. But if you're just looking for somebody who's going to be out there and, kind of casting your lot with that, I think Xavier Hutchinson makes sense alongside Metchie. Really, really embarrassed to even throw this one out there, but Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, if you really want to get a piece of that Titans offense, he played the most snaps, he ran the most routes, was only targeted 4 times, of course, by Mason Rudolph last week, but this is a Titans team that will be playing from behind. There's opportunity there after the DeAndre Hopkins trade. Tim Patrick in Detroit. Lions are coming off of a bizarre, literally one-of-a-kind week in which they scored 52 points but threw for under 90 yards. That has literally never happened in the history of the NFL. Should see at least closer to a traditional script this week at Lambeau Field. Jameis Williams, of course, out one more game. So I do think Tim Patrick is a viable option for one more week. Lil-Jordan Humphrey is out there. He seems to be the new wide receiver 2 now in Denver. 6 targets for him last week. Although, like we said, the Broncos schedule starting to pick up. And Parker Washington, Jeff, in Jacksonville. We have some pretty serious attrition with the Jags right now. Brian Thomas is banged up. Did get positive news on him, but could still miss a game. Christian Kirk, on the other hand, done for the season. Gabe Davis went out this past week. I mean, there's a realistic scenario, Jeff, in which Parker Washington is the wide receiver 1 this week against Philly. And at the very least, I think he could be a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 in that offense the rest of the year. So we're ultimately talking about relatively low upside. He's someone that they use on special teams, but he did work into the mix late last season after Christian Kirk went down. So there's some familiarity there with Trevor Lawrence.
Yep. And this is a good transition to the next position because I like his teammate Brenton Strange a little bit this week too. I think you'll see some 2 tight end sets with all the attrition at wide receiver. Mike Gesicki was pretty effective against the Eagles until he fumbled in the fourth quarter. I think tight ends might be able to get some work done against the Eagles. So I think Strange might not be a bad pickup.
Yeah, you saw some pretty high volume earlier this season when Evan Ingram was out. And, like you said, they're just kind of out of options at receiver, especially if Thomas and or Davis, were to miss extended time. So I think that's a good call. Weekly reminder to double check on Taysom Hill. He was back in the mix this past week. That game kind of got away from New Orleans, but Lord knows there are going to be the Taysom Hill spots the rest of the way. And then the last tight end that I have, Jeff, Will Dissly for the LA Chargers, 18 targets over the last 2 weeks with Hayden Hurst out. Now, it's unclear just how much time Hayden Hurst will miss, but this might be Dissly's job, even when Hurst is back. I mean, he's vastly outplayed Hayden Hurst. He's outproduced him so far this season, starting to see a much larger snap share even before Hurst went down. And this Chargers team loves throwing the ball to tight ends. They don't have a ton of viable options in the receiving core. Cleveland, Tennessee, Cincy, Baltimore are your next 4 matchups. You're going to have to throw the ball in all those scenarios. Again, you're never going to be fired up about Will Dissly, but he's been surprisingly solid these last 2 games.
He has, and he was like in that Arizona Monday night game. He was like the primary guy for them.
Yeah.
So we did finally see Ladd McConkey emerge as the primary guy for the Chargers this past week. Talk another team that's got vast wide receiver attrition. That's another team that might have to turn to the tight end a little bit more. Yeah,
the last guy I would shout out here to go back to receiver real quickly, and he's again not sneaky, but he's over 50% available in ESPN leagues, is Josh Downs. We just had the Flacco conversation. I mean, Josh Downs is viable with Anthony Richardson. That says a lot. Not many receivers are able to do that. Michael Pittman can't even do that. And Josh Downs had a really nice 3-game run with Flacco earlier this year. He averaged 8 catches for 72 yards on 10 targets per game and a couple touchdowns during that run as well. So if you, like me, think that there's a real chance the Colts could move back to Joe Flacco at some point in the near future, Josh Downs is somebody that I think we'll see his roster rate shoot up in that scenario. So try to get out ahead of it. That'll do it for sneaky ads ahead of week 9. If you haven't already, please make sure you're subscribed to the RotoWire Fantasy Football YouTube channel. Please give this video a like if you're enjoying it. We're going to keep bringing you a ton of waiver wire content, a ton of fantasy football content, gambling content, all through the NFL season. So make sure you are subscribed. Click the little subscribe button right there to the RotoWire YouTube channel.